The missile that just hit Saft was not a random target. It was the single most important military address on Israel's entire northern border, and Iran found it on Wave 80. By the time the dust cleared, the same attack had also struck Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport's perimeter, Kiryat Shimona, and 4 American military bases across 3 separate countries, all in one coordinated wave, and the White House had declared Iran militarily dead just hours before the launches began. Something in that picture does not add up. Over the next several minutes, we're going to pull every thread: the weapons, the math, the casualties, the economics, and the widening gap between what world leaders are saying at their podiums and what is physically landing on the ground. There are thousands of military installations across Israel. Iran picked one specific building in the northern city of Safed, and that choice tells you exactly how detailed Iran's targeting intelligence has become. The facility at Saft is the headquarters of Israel's Northern Command. That is not ceremonial. Every single troop rotation into southern Lebanon runs through that building. Every artillery order, every defensive position along the Lebanese border. The 2 frontline combat divisions currently operating in that theater report to commanders inside that structure. The armored units on the Golan Heights coordinate through it. Territorial defense forces stationed right on the Lebanese border take their orders from it. When the IRGC described the SAFE base as the facility responsible for commanding and deploying forces along the northern borders, that was not propaganda. It was a precise technical description of what happens in that building every day. Now understand why that matters right now at this specific moment. On March 17th, Israel launched a fresh ground invasion into southern Lebanon. That entire ground campaign, the troop movements, the supply lines, the fire coordination, is managed out of SAFE. At the same time, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has declared that Israel intends to hold a security zone extending all the way up to the Litani River, and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich went further by calling for the Litani to become Israel's permanent northern border. Let that land for a second. These are not defensive statements. These are territorial annexation statements. Israel is not just defending its northern border, it is occupying new Lebanese land, and the command center running that occupation just took direct fire from ballistic missiles. And that wasn't the only front lighting up at the same moment. While Wave 80 was inbound, continuous air raid sirens had been sounding across northern Israel for hours. Hezbollah rockets were launching from the north. Gaza remained unresolved in the south. 3 active combat fronts. One command center targeted in a single, synchronized strike. The scale of the coordination here was not accidental, and the weapons Iran chose to deliver it were specifically engineered to make it as difficult to stop as possible. Most coverage of this conflict reduces the Iranian arsenal to a single phrase: ballistic missiles. That framing misses everything that matters. There are 2 specific weapons driving Wave 80, and they are fundamentally different machines with fundamentally different strategic purposes. The Sejil is a 2-stage, solid-fuel, intermediate-range ballistic missile. It runs roughly 17.5 meters long, weighs approximately 23 tons, and carries a warhead ranging between 500 kilograms and 1 ton. Its operational range stretches between 2,000 and 2,500 kilometers. Iran has publicly stated it can reach Tel Aviv from launch sites near Natanz in under 7 minutes. But the technical detail that transforms this missile from a threat into a nightmare for Israeli planners is the solid fuel propulsion. Liquid-fueled missiles require extended fueling time on the launch pad, time that satellites can detect, time that opens a window for preemptive strikes. The Sejil fires from road-mobile launchers with almost 0 preparation time. There is no fueling window. There is no detectable launch signature visible from orbit in time to act. The missile climbs on a steep ballistic arc, exits the atmosphere entirely, then re-enters at hypersonic speeds. That re-entry profile creates what missile defense analysts call the terminal descent problem, the point where everything gets decided in seconds, at altitudes and speeds where ground-based radar networks have the narrowest possible engagement window. The Khorramshahr-4, also designated the K-bar, is a completely different kind of weapon. It is liquid-fueled, measuring roughly 13 meters for the motor section, plus an additional 4 meters for the warhead assembly. Launch weight falls between 19,000 and 26,000 kilograms. It carries the heaviest confirmed payload in Iran's operational arsenal, between 1,500 and 1,800 kilograms. Its Arvand engine runs on hypergolic fuel, a propellant combination that ignites on contact and can sit in sealed storage tanks for years, without degradation, cutting launch preparation time down to approximately 12 minutes. The Khorramshahr-4 also carries a mid-course navigation system that corrects its trajectory while it is still outside the atmosphere. That detail is critical. It means electronic warfare jamming, the kind Israel uses to confuse terminal guidance systems. Does not work against it during its most vulnerable phase of flight. The missile corrects its path in space, where no jamming signal can reach it. By the time it re-enters the atmosphere, it is already locked. But neither the propulsion nor the navigation is the most dangerous feature of the Khorramshahr-4. What it carries inside its nose cone is what is actually breaking this war open. Here is the central military reality that the conventional news cycle keeps stumbling past. The Khorramshahr-4 can be fitted with a cluster warhead containing up to 80 individual submunitions. Each of those submunitions carries approximately 2 to 5 kilograms of high explosives. When the warhead activates, at an altitude of roughly 7 to 10 kilometers above the target, it releases all 80 bomblets simultaneously. They scatter across an area of approximately 10 kilometers in every direction, falling simultaneously, too small and too numerous and too spread out for any defense system on Earth to reliably intercept once deployed. Dr. Uzi Rubin, the former director of Israel's Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, stated this plainly when discussing the cluster warhead challenge. After the cluster opens, he said, it is too late. Israel's Arrow system is specifically built to destroy incoming ballistic missiles, but it must achieve that kill before the warhead crosses the 7-kilometer threshold. If the Arrow intercepts the missile above that altitude but doesn't score a direct, clean kill, the bomblets can still deploy from a damaged missile body and fall on the target area. You destroy the missile and the payload still lands. Iron Dome operates at completely different altitudes against short-range rockets. It was never engineered to simultaneously track and engage dozens of small, fast-falling metallic objects scattered across miles of airspace in the seconds between cluster deployment and ground impact. The IDF has now publicly acknowledged something that would have been unthinkable to admit at the start of this conflict. Israeli air defense commanders have made deliberate decisions not to shoot down certain incoming cluster bomblets in order to preserve their stockpile of short-range interceptors. Read that carefully. Israel is choosing to let some munitions land because shooting them down costs more than absorbing the impact. That is not a temporary tactical adjustment. That is a structural breakdown in the logic of layered air defense. And the financial math behind that decision is even more alarming than the decision itself, which we'll get to shortly. The IDF confirmed as of March 20th that approximately half of all Iranian ballistic missiles fired in this conflict have been fitted with cluster warheads. That is not a niche weapon being used experimentally. It is the standard configuration for roughly half of Iran's entire offensive launch profile. Before we go any further, it is worth spending a moment on the version of this conflict that is being communicated through official channels, because the distance between that version and documented battlefield reality is now measured in dozens of impact sites and several hundred casualties. US and Israeli officials have repeatedly stated that the bombing campaign inside Iran has meaningfully degraded Iran's offensive missile capability. Israeli military spokesman Efi Defrin claimed Iran had initially planned to fire hundreds of missiles on day one, but managed fewer than 100, with the daily average dropping to roughly 10 launches per day. President Trump told reporters on the same day as Wave 80 that Iran is totally defeated and militarily dead, and that American planes are flying over Tehran without resistance. Hours later, the same day, Iran launched the 80th wave of coordinated ballistic missile strikes and hit 4 American military bases across 3 countries. The IRGC spokesperson went on video directly after and responded, "The strategic power you boast about has become a strategic defeat." Let's look at what the numbers actually say, because the IDF itself supplied them. Since the conflict began on February 28th, Iran has executed 80 separate attack waves across 26 days. That is more than 3 full attack waves per day, sustained for nearly a month. The IDF confirmed that 365 ballistic missiles had crossed toward Israel through March 20th. 285 entered Israeli airspace. Approximately 270 were intercepted, an overall interception rate above 90%. That sounds like a victory until you read the next sentence. Even with a 90+% intercept rate, more than 24 confirmed cluster warhead strikes hit populated civilian areas, creating over 100 separate impact sites across Israeli territory. Instead of missiles getting harder to launch, Iran pivoted to platforms that are harder to find. The introduction of the Zulfiqar solid fuel missile in waves 76 and 77 on March 23rd, and the continued deployment of the Sejil in wave 80, reflects a deliberate strategic shift toward road-mobile solid propellant systems. These weapons need no fixed fueling infrastructure. They operate from small, nondescript vehicle convoys. They leave almost no detectable signature for satellite surveillance between the moment they depart a staging area and the moment the missile launches. The 80 waves in 26 days alone is the single most complete rebuttal to the Iran is running out of missiles narrative, and Iran keeps validating it with every new launch cycle. The names and numbers from this conflict are not getting the kind of persistent coverage that the political and strategic narrative is getting, so let's put them on record here. At least 6 people were killed in a single missile strike in Beth Shemesh on March 1st, one of the deadliest single attacks on Israeli civilians since this conflict began. 2 construction workers were killed in Yehud. 2 residents in their 70s were killed in Ramat Gan. Nearly 200 people were wounded in a single attack on the Diona area and Arad on March 22nd, after Israeli air defense systems failed to intercept at least 2 missiles from what analysts identified as the Ghadar family, a medium-range ballistic missile with significant payload capacity. At least 1 woman was killed in northern Israel during the air raid attacks accompanying Wave 80. Across multiple waves, Iranian cluster bomblets have injured civilians across a radius that traditional missile defense maps don't account for because the submunitions scatter far beyond the expected impact zone of any single missile body. These are not collateral incidents on the margin of a mostly defended front. These are the direct product of a strategic gap in Israeli air defense architecture that has been identified, confirmed, and publicly acknowledged by Israeli military officials themselves. The cluster warhead has turned a 90% intercept success rate into a system that still produces 100+ separate civilian impact sites. That math does not improve on its own. Before February 28th, Brent crude oil was trading at approximately $72 to $87 per barrel. Within the first 2 weeks of the conflict, it spiked toward $120. Dubai crude hit an all-time high above $150 per barrel. Oman crude settled above $152. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas flows, has been heavily disrupted since early March after Iranian military operations targeted multiple vessels navigating the passage. The International Energy Agency characterized this disruption as the largest supply shock in the history of the global oil market. Gulf oil production has dropped by at least 10 million barrels per day. The IEA authorized the release of 400 million barrels from emergency global reserves, the largest such release in the agency's history. The United States committed 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Prices barely moved. Qatar Energy declared force majeure on all exports after the Hormuz closure took effect on March 4th. Global stock markets declined. Bond markets sold off. The entire Gulf Cooperation Council economic model, built on the assumption of uninterrupted Hormuz transit, is under structural stress. California gasoline crossed $5 per gallon in the second week of March. Analysts are now warning that urea and nitrogen fertilizer prices could roughly double if the conflict drags on, because a major share of global fertilizer trade transits the Strait of Hormuz. Brazil, which supplies close to 60% of global soybean exports, depends on those fertilizer shipments, meaning the disruption is now reaching agricultural commodity chains on the other side of the planet. But the most specific and alarming cost calculation in this conflict is not the oil price. It is the interceptor equation. A single Iranian ballistic missile costs somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 to manufacture. A single Arrow 3 interceptor, one of Israel's premium long-range systems, costs between $2 million and $3 million per round. A single THAAD interceptor runs $12.7 million each. During the June 2025 12-day war alone, the United States burned through an estimated 150 THAAD interceptors at a total cost exceeding $1.9 billion. That consumed approximately 14% of the entire American THAAD stockpile in roughly 2 weeks. THAAD production lines are limited enough that the Pentagon has since moved to emergency expansion of manufacturing output. The current conflict has now lasted more than double the length of that June engagement, with no signs of approaching resolution. Israel's estimated daily defense expenditure in this conflict runs as high as $200 million per day. Run that number for 26 days, and you are already past $5 billion, just on the defense side, not counting reconstruction, emergency services, or the economic contraction caused by disrupted commerce in northern and central Israel. Iran, meanwhile, is not spending $200 million a day defending itself. It is spending a fraction of that launching the attacks. That asymmetry is the strategic core of what Iran's military planners built this campaign around. You do not need to destroy your enemy's cities. You need to make defending them cost more than they can sustain. When a $300,000 missile forces a $12.7 million response, and you can launch 3 waves a day for a month without visibly exhausting your stockpile, the equation favors the attacker by a factor that no defense budget on Earth can close indefinitely. The Arrow system and THAAD are extraordinary pieces of engineering. They are also finite resources with production timelines measured in years, not months, and they are being consumed against a supply chain that has just demonstrated 80 waves of output in 26 days without confirmed depletion. The cluster warhead compounds this further, because if the missile breaks apart at 7 kilometers and releases 80 submunitions, shooting down the missile does not end the cost. The damage still lands, the injury count still climbs, the political pressure on Israeli leadership still builds. Defenders have to intercept the incoming round and absorb the aftermath of the bomblets that slip through. Attackers absorb none of that. They manufacture a missile, launch it, and wait for the news cycle. After Wave 80, the IRGC issued a direct warning. If Israel continues its operations in Lebanon and Gaza, the gathering points of Israeli forces in northern occupied Palestine and the Gaza Strip will face heavy missile and drone barrages without any consideration. That language is a significant escalation in declared intent. Previous IRGC statements framed strikes as retaliatory and targeted at military infrastructure. This statement names Israeli troop concentrations in an active occupation zone as primary targets, meaning the scope of declared targeting has expanded beyond infrastructure and into force-on-force direct engagement. At the same time, President Trump has continued to frame the situation as one in which Iran is desperately seeking negotiations and has been badly weakened by U.S. pressure. These two simultaneous realities, an IRGC threatening expanded strikes and a U.S. president announcing Iranian desperation, occupied the same 24-hour news cycle on March 24th, with Iran's 80th wave landing between them. The IRGC's response was delivered calmly and on camera. If you could escape this, you would have already. Ceasefire negotiations have been referenced in media reports, but as of Wave 80, no framework has produced a pause in operations. Iran has now moved to deploying more solid-fuel road-mobile systems, the Zulfiqar and the Sejil, which are structurally harder to target in a preemptive or reactive strike. The shift away from fixed launch infrastructure toward dispersed road-mobile convoys means that even sustained bombing inside Iran reduces, but does not eliminate, launch capacity. Road-mobile launchers are, by design, impossible to fully catalog from satellite imagery when they are dispersed across a large territory. The global economy is repricing in real time. Oil markets are recalibrated at a permanently higher baseline until Hormuz stabilizes. Fertilizer chains are under pressure. Shipping insurance premiums for Gulf routes have climbed to levels that make commercial transit economically unviable for many smaller operators. The Stimson Center's analysis describes what is happening not as a temporary spike driven by alarming headlines, but as a genuine supply disruption with cascading effects on inflation, currency markets, and emerging economies that depend on affordable energy and food inputs. 80 waves, 26 days. Sejil missiles reaching Israeli territory in under 7 minutes, Khorramshahr warheads scattering 80 bomblets across 10 kilometers that no defense system on Earth can fully neutralize once deployed. The command hub for Israel's entire northern front directly struck. The Strait of Hormuz disrupted at a scale the IEA has called historically unprecedented, interceptors being consumed years faster than they can be manufactured. And the country declared militarily dead on a Wednesday morning launched its 80th wave of ballistic missiles by Wednesday night. What is happening in this conflict is not just a regional military exchange. It is a live demonstration of the limits of layered air defense against a well-resourced adversary that has deliberately engineered its weapons to exploit those limits. Cluster warheads did not become Iran's standard payload by accident. They became standard because someone ran the same arithmetic we just ran and concluded that a missile designed to defeat interception is worth more than a missile designed for maximum explosive yield. If interception is what you want to overwhelm, you build something that survives interception. The question that no one in Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran is answering publicly right now is this. What happens to the military and political calculus of this conflict when the side spending $3 million per interception runs out of interceptors before the side spending $300,000 per missile runs out of missiles? That gap is not narrowing. It is widening every single day. And 80 waves is not the end of the data set. It's the midpoint of a trend line that is still moving in one direction.